location. And then there's the Western Heritage
I know there's
Museum.
a Western Heritage, a big one there.
Yes.
And Cowboy.
Did I get everything done I was supposed to get done?
The Cowboy Western Heritage Museum.
I've done everything I need to do, right?
When we were coming back to both of them and the boys. And they were, and our 10-year-old
No, no.
and
I
I
sent you
was
all the time.
surprised at the amount of time they
Oh, for the
spent
MEC you're talking about?
looking,
Oh, yeah, yeah, MEC's
reading,
fine.
and listening to the videos in the memorial to in the memorial.
Okay, we have a little pointer.
Museum.
It's not working, so we were told.
They're the memorial. It's very interesting. They had rows of chairs, different sizes. Children, they were home, women, and men. And the rows
Okay,
were
good. Well, he's not here, so it doesn't matter.
and they had names
Try to
on
muddle
them.
through
We
this.
took a couple of pictures of the names, and then in the museum, they had pictures of them with their names, so the kids could relate to them and see. No.
He was serious and he goes,
Original Ruth
he was in the medical field. It takes
complete
years for these.
collection of Ruth all kinds of
And that's the way the museum is in Oklahoma City. You get there.
I know.
There's lots of really interesting stuff. They have a lot of artwork. They have a mock-up town where people, the kids would close each other in the jail cell, old-fashioned jail cell. And it was. They had a good time. They learned a lot. They were reading all the science and the different things around. And for two 13-year-olds and a 10-year-old, I mean, it. Yeah. So that was really enjoyed that. And,
Most of my time through Oklahoma City was traveling somewhere.
well, so
Oklahoma City was my place to stop.
well, we were coming back from Pennsylvania, so we put that on the trail. The boys like Elvis, so we went through Memphis and did Graceland and that whole thing, and then came through Shawnee.
I went through Graceland. The lady that lived in the same area I did, high school,
I already got one. The three of us got it.
Dealt with
a lot of
Philly,
stuff in Memphis when I was
but they're planning
I said
on
it's
Elvis
exactly, you know.
in
At
Los
least I'll
Angeles or
probably have
somewhere down
done a
there.
plan and
So that'll be good too. We'll go to that definitely when I get it going.
in fact, I
beginning
went
to
to
anyway.
motorcycle.
God, great. What am I gonna do with 2 dogs and 4 cats?
You got a picture?
I'll go get a second opinion.
I was too mystified.
I understand that one.
Where to go?
Yeah.
That was
That was enough. Yeah. That's off your bucket list now. Yeah, I gotta get back and get my check.
It's hard to figure out where you are.
They have stage it. I think I looked it up and it's stage 2. That's a dangerous path. So how long is your friend?
Cold, okay. Amy wears for her chairs. She has a little bracelet that goes on the back here. And then she has another little booster that yeah, all I need is support. But we have to have the fake back so that everybody looks uniform.
And then put us all on a bench. I don't either.
Jamie, do we have an agenda of any kind, or we just going to? Okay. Good. Okay. Works for me.
How much have
Mayor is out of town. He's at some leadership training in Tucson.
Hey, sir. You got your keys, huh? All right. Gonna harass this guy.
I've ruined his neighborhood.
Did he get a new house?
Yeah, we bought one.
What a house.
Really?
Yeah. Closed this weekend.
Oh, they aren't too far from us.
No.
You're the
Well,
Nebraska water.
all my stuff is driving by your house. You just haven't seen it yet.
My dogs are probably barking at you all the time.
Yeah, they bark when I run my bike by.
You're over on the west.
Yeah. So this weekend, we emptied the storage unit, emptied my garage out, put all the storage there.
That means the majority of us have.
I took all the doors off, took all the hardware off, painted the
Is this thing now that we got a check from that, does it mean that we order water lines now and we can start
The
charging?
house is completely painted as of 7 o'clock last night. Lenny's painting was the doors and the windows.
Okay, but when
She
do
should be
we,
done today.
do we still have to go?
We got a new fridge delivered today.
They're two separate
And we
items.
put people down everywhere, so we did.
This is their highway tax
Right.
that they didn't pay us for the last 6 years.
Have you moved in now? Or you-
No, not yet.
You're good.
And I got 1,000 square feet of laminate that I gotta put in, which is this weekend. And the trim, that'll be good.
I noticed that we got a quote that they thrown into here tonight.
She's gonna be cleaning the kitchen tomorrow and start moving
They
stuff.
say we're gonna push this stuff, don't they?
Because we don't have to be out to the end of the month. So it's cool, because she can just, and when we moved in this rental, we only took like 10 plates, 6 glasses, 4 wine glasses. So
Important stuff.
she can unload the boxes, this is put the stuff away. And so when we move, we just have to get furniture, so.
And
It's nice and
Frank's
smooth.
thinking to really find anything.
Well, if you need some help, I'll come over and
Watch.
I don't do manual labor, but drink a beer with you, yes.
The neighbors all come over and met us, and it just seems like a really nice
It
neighborhood.
is a nice area. Who are your neighbors?
One guy's named Doug, he's right on the corner, and the other guy's named Bill, he's on the other side. Yeah, on the other side. So, yeah, it's gonna be nice.
That's nice.
Really glad. It's gonna be
Well,
nice.
I think it's,
And it's quiet.
Yeah.
We don't have much. I have.
No, wait, he has these parties that go till 3 o'clock in the morning. all his old Navy buddies come over and see who's got the biggest cake.
I'm totally okay with that. I'm welding up a smoker trailer, and I'll bring it over and park it in front.
Mine's okay with.
I'll be there to eat and drink.
He's okay with.
We may discuss same directly with the
Cool.
You know what the first project's
None
gonna
of
be?
that has to do,
Because the
it's
backyard
just for the
has
purpose
nothing in
of
it, and
inquiry.
that's why
You
we
can go and
just
ask
has
about any project.
I'm gonna build an outdoor
You
pizza.
don't have to go through the town.
Always wanted one, so I'll do something.
Really?
Yeah, I've been
And
watching
he
YouTube videos
directed us to
and how they do it.
Have you ever been to the little place down in Peoples Valley? The T-Bird Cafe
Okay.
in Peoples Valley. You go in there, and it's an Italian setup. They got a like a 55 pink T-Bird sitting out front, left-hand side.
Okay.
Go in there. They cook their pizza in a brick oven. It's right there where you can see it. They do everything right by the counter there. Put the pizza in there. It is the best pizza that I've ever had.
People's Valley. Huh?
Yep. It's called the T-Bird Cafe. It is worth the. We ride the bikes down there just to have lunch.
Oh, that'd be great.
I'm gonna start that and just keep building out to the side. Maybe counter, maybe barbecue, whatever.
Yeah.
Who knows whatever you guys want. It's gonna be
Put walls on it.
T-Bird Cafe.
TV and you watch.
It's got a. You can't miss it. It's got a. Like I said, a 55 T-Bird out there. It's bright
put
pink.
the TV out there and you have the remote and everything in the house.
I'm gonna mount it on the porch. Honest to God.
Well, once you get ready, we'll have a housewarming and we'll come over and break it in right now. You got it all cleaned up and everything.
Rolled in this afternoon from Elkhart.
Hey, my kid. Are you ready?
No, not yet. I'm on my way back out.
Wait for the signal.
Up above Camp Verde, northwest, northeast of Camp Verde. 6A is the area.
They're ready to move in.
Yeah, they're ready to get us there.
Do I need to talk into this?
Magnetic? Yes, I saw them on.
Yeah, there's a magnetic plate on the back
Yes.
that sticks to it.
I'm ready.
Okay, then you make.
I'll make the announcement. Good evening, everyone, to our first inaugural, hopefully, annual open meeting law training, although we are constantly being trained in open meeting laws around here because things happen. They just always happen. We just wanted to let you know that this is a bit of a change-up from our normal Tuesday evening schedule. Planning and Zoning Commission usually meets at 6 o'clock, but in order to accommodate the training and the P&Z meeting, we are holding the training at 6, and the P&Z meeting will start about 15 minutes after this concludes. It takes that long for our audiovisual people to reset for the next taping. So when this is over, we'll give them about 15 minutes, and then the P&Z meeting will start. And this is being broadcast live, and then it will be on our website so that anybody who's part of another public body, commission, advisory board for the town of Chino Valley will be able to go on and watch the training and get it for themselves. And I'd like to introduce Phyllis Smiley. She is our town attorney. She's with Curtis, Goodwin, Sullivan, Udall, and Schwab, correct?
Correct.
Yay! And she's going to be giving us the training today.
Thank you, Jamie. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. The open meeting law is very important in the service as a public official, so I'm glad that you're all here. And tonight we're going to talk about the open meeting law, and we are also going to talk about conflicts of interest, public records, and the town's code of ethics. So we'll do each of those in individual parts. And if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to ask them. If we get too many questions, I might ask you to wait until the end of a section. So we're going to start off with the open meeting law. And we all know that Arizona is considered to be a sunshine state. And for weather, we know what this means. But does anybody know what this means as far as public meetings is concerned? I didn't think so. So as far as public meetings, it means that the public's business is to be done in public. So that means no backroom cigar smoking decisions by councils or by committees. So what is a public meeting? A public meeting, in order to be a public meeting, has to be properly noticed. And the agenda, does anybody know how far in advance an agenda needs to be posted? 24 hours. If it's a zoning matter, then you're right about the 2 weeks. It's 50. For a public hearing on zoning. Yeah. So the answer is, of course, 24 hours in advance. And then for a lawful meeting, the other requirement is that a quorum of the committee or the council must be present. Do you know what happens if a quorum isn't present?
Nothing.
Well, you can have the meeting, but the only thing that you can do is you can have a meeting to continue the items that are on the agenda to the next meeting. And that's important because, especially for planning and zoning, if you continue the items, then you don't have to republish the notice of public hearing ads. And so there are some items that come before council that also, that would apply to, like liquor licenses. If you want to hold a meeting in private, may you? Well, there are certain limited circumstances where particularly the council can hold a meeting in private. Sometimes, very rarely, a planning commission or another committee might hold a meeting in private, but mostly it's called an executive session, and there are reasons listed in the statute allowing this for the public bodies. And it includes things like personnel, litigation to consider the town's position, negotiations with personnel groups. Did I say personnel decisions? It also includes purchase of property and contract negotiations. Also, there might be documents that are confidential from public viewing. Generally, these would include things like security plans. So, what actually is a meeting? And this is where a lot of people get tripped up. You've got to have a quorum of the public body, and the public body has to discuss, propose, or take legal action. So what we're doing tonight is, as in my section of tonight, the training is not a meeting, even though quorums of 2 public bodies are here, because we're not discussing any town business. It's purely educational. So there are 2 types of meetings. There are traditional meetings and there are electronic meetings. Electronic meetings basically are where the members are meeting electronically, but there has to be a way for the public to be present. So if you have one member of the council, say, who is appearing telephonically or via Skype or FaceTime, then that would count as an electronic meeting. Now, there are a couple places that people get tripped up. One is serial meetings. And serial meetings are really, really easy to do and without even knowing. So what is a serial meeting? A serial meeting is when less than a quorum of the public body, George and Henry, get together and they're talking about some business that's going to come before the town. And then Henry goes and talks to Mary, and George goes and talks to Susie, and you've already got 4 people discussing something that's going to come before the public body without a meeting. So this is considered a serial meeting, and it is a no-no. Because later, then the same matter would come to the board or the council, and the public hasn't been privy to the whole discussion. So if you have just Mary talking to Henry, then it's not a serial meeting because it's only 2 members of the public body. But once you involve other people, then it is. So it has to be enough people to constitute a quorum. The problem is that once you start, it's really difficult to hold that discussion only to 2 people or to 3 people. So, okay, so this is, you may have just had a serial meeting. So remember, the thing to take away from here is that if you're going to talk about town business, you really should wait until there's a formal meeting. And we'll talk about how emails get into that later. So the idea seems simple, but technology complicates it because you can do a serial meeting via telephone, you can do it via texting, you can do it via email really, really easily. And on the texting and on the emails, be very careful, and I know the council is very wary of replying to all, and they're very careful about this. So you need to not reply to all. Another pitfall is, as I was saying, in sending emails. So we're going to talk about emails a lot because this council likes to send emails. So you start off by sending an email, and you think about what is it going to talk about. If it's going to propose legal action, or if you're going to talk about something that's going to come before the council, even if you think that it's a long shot that it's going to come before the council, and it may be before the council in a year or 2, you still need to think, uh-oh, maybe I shouldn't email here. So if it proposes legal action, do not send it to 3 or more members of the public body. Actually, yeah, because if you send it to 3, then you're the 4th one and you've got a quorum. if, let's see, if you don't send it to 3 or more members, or if it doesn't propose legal action, you're sending an email to invite everybody to your daughter's wedding, it's not going to violate the open meeting law. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to understand what you just said.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, if you send an email to 3 people, you're the fourth, that comprises a forum, and that's legal?
No,
Oh, it's not?
not legal. So if you send it to 2 other people, you've only sent it to 3 members of the public body. This is assuming that you've got 7 members on your public body. If you have a public body that's only 5 members, or as I understand, there might be a public body here that has 3 members, then you send it to somebody else, one other person, you've got a meeting. So that would be a violation. So if it doesn't propose legal action, again, you need to think about whether it contains facts or other matters that are likely to come before the public body. And again, the analysis is the same. Do not send it to 3 or more people who are members of the public body.
I do have a question at this point. As a representative to NACOG for the town, they frequently send out their agendas ahead of time. We've made it a practice to give it to the clerk so she can send it out to the council members. Assuming that if anyone had a comment that they wanted brought up at that meeting, how would one handle that? Would they approach the representative directly, or should I be asking at the council meeting if there is one ahead of time? How would you find out if they had a comment on something that was on an agenda when you're a representative like that?
If an individual member of the public body has a question for the NACOG representative, I think it would be fine for them to contact you.
Okay.
And even if 4 or 5 of them had a comment, they can contact you. They should not discuss it among themselves and then say, 4 people get together and they say, well, I don't think that's right. I have an opinion on that. And the other guy says, well, yeah, I have an opinion on that too. And the other guy says, yeah, I do too. And then all of a sudden you've got 4 people talking about it, and they come to you with their opinion as one. If they each come to you individually, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. This gets very complicated, and I don't really understand this whole slide, but with all the arrows going everywhere, it's a little complex.
So
Yes.
it's okay for 3 or more people to contact her individually, but it's not okay for her to contact 3 or 4 other people.
Right. That's true.
Okay.
That's true, because if she were to contact 3 or 4 other people, she would be polling the council, which wouldn't be right. But if they read the agenda and they all individually, without her solicitation or anything, contact her and say, this is what I think you should do on that, then, and 2, if she gets contacted by 3 or 4 other people on the council, she may want to bring it to the council for a discussion of everybody to make sure that everybody on the council does agree, and then she gets the town's position on that matter before she goes to the NACOG meeting. And that probably would be the best solution in that situation.
Provided we had the time.
Right, which you may not. So next pitfall is social media. So you have your Facebook page, and you post your comments about something that's coming before the council on your Facebook page, where you just happen to be friends with a quorum of the public body on which you sit. Is this an open meeting law problem? Well, it depends. There is a statute that says that you may express your opinions publicly through the media or through other technological means, and that's what applies to Facebook, if the opinion or discussion is not principally directed at the other members of the public body. So you have 4,000 friends on Facebook, and you just put it on your Facebook page. Well, 4,000 people are getting your information. So the legislature has decided that that's not a problem with the open meeting law. And there's a second part to this, that there has to be no concerted plan to engage in collective deliberation through social media or to take legal action through that method. So that statute actually replaced a Attorney General's opinion that addressed a situation where a council member had talked to the media, to a newspaper reporter, or I believe it was a TV reporter, about an issue that was before the council. And there was a complaint, an open meeting law complaint, and the Attorney General said, no, the information went to all of the public. So it wasn't just directed at the council members, so it was okay.
Was that the one where he talked about what was going to go on in executive? Because there was one where he
No.
talked about you're allowed to interview about your opinion of something prior to executive. That's a Attorney General. I was wondering if that's what you were addressing.
I don't think it was an executive session, but you might be right.
That you're allowed to, prior to an executive session, you're allowed to talk to the media with your personal opinion. On the Facebook thing, what if everybody writes back? You can't respond then, right? You can only post what you post. You can't respond if 4,000 people.
As long as those people are not members of the public body, you can respond. You can respond to your constituents. Another place people go astray of the open meeting law is when attending other meetings. And again, there's an Attorney General opinion on this question. Had to do with a bunch of council members. I think there were 4 council members sitting in the back of, I believe, a Planning and Zoning Commission meeting in, I think, Cave Creek. The question to ask yourself at that point is if anyone is making a proposal at that meeting that will come before your public body. So council member goes to the Planning Commission. Planning Commission is a recommending body to the council. So the Planning Commission is considering a rezoning that is going to come before the council. The best thing to do in that situation is to just sit and listen. And here's why. Because if a quorum of your board or commission is present at that Planning Commission meeting, then you have a potential open meeting law problem. And I believe that your Planning Commission meetings are also televised. So if you go to a Planning Commission meeting and you start speaking about your opinion as a council member in the meeting of the Planning Commission, you don't know whether the rest of the council is perhaps listening or watching on TV. So if you're going to do that, if you're going to go to their meetings, you really should not comment on any of the matters on the agenda.
As a council member.
As a council member.
As an individual, it may affect your personal property. And you may want to speak as an individual.
It
have to
still
make that
could. It still could cross the line.
Certainly not if you're going to take yourself out of the vote.
Well, you would need to take yourself out of the vote, which is coming up. But I would still be concerned about an open meeting law violation. I think in a situation like that, the better course of action would be to speak to a person on the commission earlier about the situation or to write a letter to the commission so that they would know your feelings as an individual, but you would not be running the potential of violating the open meeting law. That's a very unusual circumstance that doesn't usually happen. So I'm not exactly sure what this little guy is thinking, but we'll find out. What are your options? Again, like I said, you can either not attend and watch it on TV, not make proposals at other meetings, for sure not make proposals. And if a majority of the council wants to attend the Planning Commission, notice the meeting as your own meeting or as a joint meeting. And that way you can speak. Any questions? Yes?
Is it okay for me to ask a question?
Absolutely.
There's been really good information about council or interboard communication where council members in a quorum format may have difficulty with OML. Were you going to talk a little bit about staff? So rather than a council member maybe communicating something out directly to the rest of council, a council member could get something to a staff person who could then get it to the rest of council without there even appearing like there's an OML violation.
Are you talking about in the situation of like a council member who has a personal interest in a rezoning? Because that would be a perfect example where they could send a letter, you know, just like the regular public does. The regular public will send protest letters or whatever to pending cases, to staff on pending cases for planning. But the other item I think that you're talking about, we're probably going to discuss later.
Okay.
No, we did anyway with the NACOG, because that
Right.
goes to the clerk, and then she sends it out to all the council members.
Right. Okay, and here we have some very frustrated people. So the takeaway from this is to be mindful of your informal discussions with other members of your public body. And when you're talking to other members of the public body, just keep in the back of your head, Phyllis is going to kill me if I talk about something that has to do with town business. So remember, serial meeting, serial meeting, serial meeting, and have that be a mantra that goes in your head so that you don't actually commit a violation, because that's where most people get in trouble. So, what do you have to do to call a meeting? Well, I'm sure that your clerk knows what you do. You post an agenda on the town's official posting places and on the website. And this, like we said before, it has to be 24 hours in advance, so I'm just going to go real quick. Except in the case of an emergency. And sometimes councils say, oh, I've got an emergency. If we don't approve this contract tonight, we're going to be in real trouble. We're going to have to pay extra money. And the delay of contract is just going to kill us. Well, that's not an emergency. Basically, it's the next slide. But basically what constitutes an emergency is floodwaters running down the streets of the town or the town's on fire. Anything short of that is likely to not be found by a court, because somebody will object, likely to be found, not to be found to be an emergency, and everything that you take, any action that you take will be void. So if you can't post the notice on the website, what happens? Well, you can still hold the meeting. There's an exception in the statute requiring that. So, next slide. Okay, actual emergency. Here we go. Floodwaters running down the street. So what do you have to include on an agenda? You have to include the date, time, and place of the meeting. You have to include matters that will be discussed and any action that will possibly be taken. You also have to include well, you don't have to include, but you may include a call to the public, and Chino Valley does include a call to the public on their agenda. And by statute, the call to the public is limited to matters that may come before that public body. So on the Planning Commission, you can't have a member of the public stand up and talk about, let's see, what would be a matter that would come before the council? Say a contract for new software for the town. Because they're not going to make that decision. That's the town council's decision. Also, and I know you know this, the council knows this, but the council cannot, the public body members cannot respond to the public speaker other than to respond to criticism, to ask that the item be put on a future agenda, or to direct staff to look further into the item. There is no discussion with the member of the public. Yes.
It's my understanding a council member can step down from the dais and speak during the call to the public.
It's true.
Usually, I think probably technically that's true. But usually, if council members have something that would come as a call to the public item, they would usually either address that in their council member report, or would put it on the agenda, if they could get someone else to put it on the agenda with them. But if you had an I'm not sure exactly what you
It might be
would.
a personal matter, personal club, it might be something they want to bring to the attention, it might not be speaking as a council member, it might be speaking as an individual. There are a number of scenarios where that happened. I recall in our training for new council members that they were very clear on that. I think Bill Sims, something like that. I'm
Bill
not
Sims
sure
and I
that he
don't always
condones
agree,
of it,
but-
I'm not sure he condones that, but he did mention that it's a possibility, and I've heard it over and over again in training.
I think there is, but I just can't think of a circumstance where it would need to be done. So, yeah. And then again, the question, can we discuss matters not on the agenda? I hope you all know the answer to this. We're going to have a multiple choice, and the choices are no, seriously no, not if we don't want to be in trouble, maybe if it's an actual emergency, and all the above. So, anybody have any guesses?
What's the question again?
Huh?
What's the question again?
Can we discuss matters not on the agenda? It's not that hard. It's all of the above. And again, remember what an actual emergency is, so. Yeah, you have to be able to justify it. And then we have, as the other part of the public meetings, minutes, which are the official record and must include basically everything that's on the agenda, the date, time, and place, who was present, a description of the matters, and who who made the motion, who seconded the motion, and what was the vote. Draft minutes have to be available within 3 working days of the meeting, and then minutes are approved at the next meeting. So what happens if you violate the open meeting law? Number 1 is that actions taken are null and void. There is a way to bring back the actions and either reapprove them or ratify them in an open meeting subsequently, but the initial action is that they're null and void. And the Attorney General is the investigating body, although sometimes it's done by the county attorney. There are penalties, and an officer can be removed from office. The officer gets to pay their own legal fees and any costs that are awarded to the plaintiff. The town cannot spend any public funds for legal counsel to defend the council or the planning commission or whatever public body or person is accused of the violation. So you're on your own. Any questions about the open meeting law or public meetings, minutes, anything? Okay, then we're going to go on to conflict of interest. And I'm going to take a sip of water. Big question, do I have a conflict of interest? So we're going to help you through the analysis. First question is, do I have a pecuniary interest? And if you're like me, I went through 12 years of high school, 4 years of college, 3 years of law school, and I had no idea what the word pecuniary meant. Basically what it means is you stand to gain or lose something of value from the decision. So usually it's monetary, but it might not be monetary immediately. It might be a bump up in value of your land or a decrease in the value of your land. But basically it's gain or lose anything. If the answer is no, then you have no conflict. Now if the matter that you're discussing is a contract with the town, between the town and the company that you work for. You look at that and you say, well, I don't have a pecuniary interest. I'm not going to benefit from this. But in fact, you might. Because if your company gets a big contract with the town, then they're going to prosper. They'll be able to give raises. You might get a raise from that. You might get some job security. There might be something for you to gain. So you need to think of it in more broad terms than at first it might seem. If you do have a pecuniary interest, then you have to ask yourself another question, which is whether your interest is remote or substantial. The statutes tell us about, I believe it's a list of 13 very complex explanations of what a remote interest is. It might be 26, but it's a long list. But they don't tell you what a substantial interest is. A substantial interest is any interest that is not remote. So really what you need to do is if you have a pecuniary interest, you have to look at the statute, and then you're going to call me and you're going to say, I don't know, maybe this is remote, here's what the interest is, and I'll tell you. Hopefully I'll be able to decide. So if you have a remote interest, you do not have a conflict of interest. If you have a substantial interest, you have a conflict. And what do you do if you have a substantial interest? And you do not take part in the discussion. You make the interest known in public and in the public record. So, you say, I'm going to recuse myself because I have a conflict of interest in this matter. And then you go to Jamie and you get the public officer disclosure form and you fill that out, and then it's in the public record for all to see. And if you violate the conflict of interest laws, somebody can bring a civil suit against you to enforce it. The court may award reasonable attorney's fees to the plaintiff, but not to you. And it is a Class 6 felony if you violate it intentionally or knowingly. So if you violate it with criminal intent, basically, then you're guilty of a felon. You're a felon, you lose your rights to vote and everything else that goes along with a felony conviction. If it's just negligent or reckless, then you can be found guilty of a Class 1 misdemeanor, which is a $2,500 fine up to $2,500 and I think 6 months in jail. Don't quote me on that, but it's still, a fine and jail possible. And if it's really egregious, you can be required to forfeit your public office. So those are the scary facts. What generally happens is that people don't do this intentionally or knowingly, and in general, they are pretty diligent about recusing themselves and not participating. The problem comes in the fact that it's not just you. It's your wife, it's your children, it's your sons-in-laws, daughters-in-law, brothers, mothers, fathers. It's your family as well. So you have to go outside your circle. And sometimes people don't know what the interests of their family members are. We had a situation in Wickenburg where a council member approved a rezoning that would greatly benefit his son-in-law's business. He had no idea that his son-in-law was a partner in that business. And so when he realized that his son-in-law was a partner, then they brought the matter back to council, and council ratified. He made it known, and everything was fine. But that's the kind of thing where you have to be really careful. And where if you do get in trouble like that, call your town attorney, and we will figure out what to do to correct the situation. But it happens. Did you have a question?
Yes, I did. On this pecuniary interest thing again. Now, almost every decision this council makes will either increase or decrease the value of something they own because of the fact they live in the town here. And so every decision they make affects the town as a whole, plus or minus. So based on that, now, is there not a percentage worth of gain or loss before it becomes a conflict there, or does it just affect any change up or down would be a conflict?
Well, one of the remote interests is an interest that is shared by the same type of interest is shared by 10 or more members of the public. So town councils can raise sewer rates, for example, because they're affected. They have a pecuniary interest, but their interest is the same as everybody in the town, basically. So,
Well, more specifically, I'm thinking like on the sewer bond issue going to, and the town and everything like that, that if, to be working towards the sewer issue, if it was going to an area that affected, say, 4 of them, because they live not too far away from that, would be increasing the value of their property, even though it's a benefit to the entire town. That's not a pecuniary interest?
it is a pecuniary interest, but it's a remote interest.
Okay.
So it's not a substantial interest, so it's not a conflict of interest. Okay? Uh-huh. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about public records. And how does this affect you? Your emails about town business are public records. So, what is a public record? Again, the statutes don't define it, so we look to court law, to case law, and courts have defined it in several different ways, one of which is a record made by a public official in pursuance of a duty with the purpose to disseminate information or memorialize official transactions, or it's a record required by law or necessary in the discharge of a duty, or it's a written record of transactions of a public officer in office, which is a convenient and appropriate method of discharging duties, whether required or not. Basically, what this boils down to is public records are records made by public officers. They're the town records. They're the town contracts. They include contracts. They include statutes. They include ordinances, resolutions, and those official items, but they also include communications between council members, communications with the town manager, when the town manager sends out a memo to the council, or when Ruth sends a memo to the planning commission, or when staff provides the planning commission with a staff report prior to a rezoning. All of those items are public records. So what's the big deal about public records?
Phyllis, you have a question to that?
Yeah.
Rock row.
Oh, sorry. Yes, it is. No, no, sorry. Staff communications are also public records. You're a public officer. It's not just a public official, member of a board, body, commission. Yeah. This applies to everybody. So in general, the rule is public records, upon request by the public, and they have to be available to the public by law, and they must be produced promptly. So the producing of the public records is usually done by the town clerk. And so when the town clerk contacts you and says, I need all your records, all your emails pertaining to the Western Emulsion contract, you need to provide them promptly. And when she bugs you every day until you do that, please understand that the reason she's doing that is because she is required to promptly produce the records. Did you have a question?
Well, I was just going to say, I think there are exceptions to what might be public record, like personnel matters between the staff. But the other thing is if the clerk contacts the staff and says, protect all your emails or everything you have on this topic, it isn't up to the staff members to decide what to produce and what not. They have to produce everything, and then the clerk goes through them. Is that not correct?
That is correct.
So the staff can't decide what to produce and what not. Anything within that title goes to the clerk, and they decide.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the clerk also will oftentimes, consult with the town attorney to make sure that she's not releasing something that is protected, like personnel records, certain information in police records. There are communications between, and let me talk a little bit about this. Communications between the town attorney and the council, for example, or between the town attorney and the town manager are public records. They are protected from disclosure to some degree by the attorney-client privilege. But in a public records request, they will be noted as being withheld, and it will explain a little bit of what it is. It's a letter dated blah, 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 to, from. And it will say protected by attorney-client privilege.
They'll probably have a subject matter in it too, right?
Probably, yes. Yes. Now, what about email? Emails received or sent by you are public records if they have anything to do with your duties as a public official. One of the things about emails that often comes up is, well, I'm going to make this attorney-client privilege by CCing the town attorney. This does not work. It is still public record. It is still disclosable. So unless it's a direct communication between you and me, or between your attorney representing you in a litigation matter, whatever, it is not protected if you just CC the attorney. So in general, assume that your emails are public records, even if they're on your personal computer. And it is a very good idea to not do your emails on your personal computer for this reason, because if there's a request and there's a lawsuit saying that you didn't produce all of your records that are on your computer, then it's possible that you might be subject to a subpoena for your personal computer. So that's something to keep in mind. Not likely to happen, but it could. So any document which is wholly personal, again, the invitation to your daughter's wedding, the pictures of your new grandchildren, not public record. So to address Linda's question, can you deny access to the record? And again, this is if it's confidential by statute, which some records are, including some information in utility records, social security numbers, not public records. They're redacted from disclosure. So yes, again, the record may be withheld if it's confidential by statute. The aggrieved party can go to a court and request disclosure, and then the court, if the court finds that it should have been disclosed, then the court can award fees. Also, there are certain circumstances where a record may be a public record, but the public's right to disclose, well, the person's right to privacy may outweigh the public's right to know. Sometimes this would have to do with crime scene photos. I'm thinking of one case where that was upheld. But if there's ever a situation where you feel like you've got a public record that really nobody needs to know this and it's really an invasion of your privacy, then we'll look at it and we'll make that determination. Very rare, but it happens. And again, if that happens, if we don't disclose it, then they can go to court, they can get a court order. Usually the judge will look at it in camera and make some sort of decision. And we've got more arrows going other places. So if the public's right to know does outweigh the person's privacy, then you have to disclose it. Any questions? Oh, yes.
When you speak of public records, public, can anybody just come to town hall and request documents without a good reason, without really?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Anybody. And they don't even have to be from Arizona.
And they don't have to give a reason?
No. No.
You have to pay for it.
Well, there are copying fees, and in certain instances where if it's for a commercial purpose, then they have to say what the purpose is. Well, they have to say that it's for a commercial purpose, and then I believe there's a different fee. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about the Code of Ethics. And we, when we first put this together, we were looking at Ordinance 13768, but it also includes all of, I believe, Chapter 35 of the Town Code. And basically, it sets forth rules for the council and for members of public bodies. And based on some really good principles. Respect for the public, seek and speak the truth, maintain professional conduct with staff, civil and courteous conduct toward all people, including staff, accept respectful dissension as a public right or a civic right, and observe mandates for conduct and process for complaints if necessary. So basically, it's just written version of basic rules of being nice people and being respectful of others. So council interactions with staff. This has been an issue, and you know, I don't want you to feel like Chino Valley is being singled out, because it's always an issue every time there's a new council in basically any city or town. But what happens is that council members go to a staff member and they think that they're collaborating with the staff member. And they think, you know, gee, that meeting went really well. And then the staff member kind of looks at it as the boss of my boss is asking me these questions, and oh my God, I hope I gave the right answer, and I hope they don't tell somebody to fire me. And you know, it's nerve-wracking for the staff, and it's much better if you can work through the town manager, who is more sensitive to, not that you're insensitive, but more sensitive to the politics of the workplace, and would know right away which person to go to, first of all, for whatever question you have. The town manager might ask the staff member to explain to you directly. That can happen. But your first contact should be with the town manager. That's part of what you have him for. And it will keep us all out of trouble. Another reason why this is important is, although some of you, I'm sure, have training in personnel matters and in avoiding legal workplace harassment claims and that kind of thing, the town manager definitely has that and is very sensitive to issues involving personnel. So that's another reason to keep the town out of trouble in that respect. So, things to remember. Council members cannot act alone to direct town business. You work as a body together. When you have a decision of the council, it is a decision of the council, whether it's 4-3 or 7-0. Employees are anxious to help out council members and maybe try to go too far sometimes to help a council member, and are really reluctant to say no. So even though they seem very willing to help you, sometimes that's not really the case. Inquiries of staff can be viewed by staff as direction. So, you know, there's some communication issues, and other council members, other members of your public body may not agree with what you're asking or the way you asked it. So working together as a body, the best way to address it is through your town manager. Or if you don't feel that you can go to the town manager, come to me, and I'll try to help you. So with that said, any questions? That's it?
That's it.
Lon.
Code of ethics. It appears to me that this is something that's truly done on our honor, because there is no retaliation.
That's
We have a
correct.
code of ethics here, but if an individual decides to not abide by that code of ethics, there isn't a thing that anybody can do about it,
There's not a penalty.
right?
That's true.
So it's truly something that we have to be responsible for ourselves.
That's very true. And that's part of being a human being. We all operate by our own code of ethics, and, you know, we call it the conscience or whatever, but we do that, and sometimes we punish ourselves for not doing what we know was right. But that's true. There is no penalty. Sometimes if a council is very upset with a council member violating their code of ethics, they might vote to sanction. And it's a vote to sanction, but there's really no sanctions. You can't remove a council member. The only way to do that is through a recall election. So, you know, you can't not let a council member vote. There's really nothing you can do other than, you know, a slap on the wrist. But we just hope it doesn't happen.
Hey, that's what I was getting at. It's
Yeah.
our responsibility.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I hope that you all got something out of this. And Robert,
I'm sorry.
did I not
just-
address your issue?
Well, what I wanted to make clear was staff has the ability to broadcast information in one direction in terms of providing either the entire P&Z or the entire council with a piece of information. As long as there's no back and forth and no discussion, staff can issue that information so everybody's up to date on whatever the information is, as long as there's no ensuing discussion about it. And I just wanted to make it clear, let's say you have more than one staff member working on something and you're trying to get council fully informed about that work. It's possible for that information to be given to the council or the P&Z without that being an OML violation, because it's staff's provision of information one way to the entire group without there being a dialogue about it. And I know that that's a gray area when it comes to looking at the strict interpretation of the law by the AG. I mean, I know they like to say if it's gray, it's black. But it is possible for staff to provide information to the decision makers without it being an OML violation.
That is true. But it makes me, as your town attorney, very nervous. I know the level of detail that you like to include in your information. Here's your information for the council. And it makes me nervous because there's so much detail and there's so much information in there that really that information should be getting to the council in public. And if you come back 2 days later and say, okay, here's another update, that's almost a discussion. And that's why it makes me nervous. And it also makes it very difficult for the council, I think, to not come back and to not discuss it between themselves, or to not come back to you with a reply all mistake, or, you know, it just makes me very nervous. Linda?
I'd have to agree with that. I think if you're going to put a memo out from staff that it should, and it's that important, that you just need to take some time at a council meeting so we can all discuss it, so we avoid somebody trying to respond, and so we hear all sides of it, and we have an opportunity to fully discuss it, not just hear one thing.
Right. And that way, if you do it in a council meeting, then you can have your discussion, they can ask their questions, and really flesh out what's going on.
I'm just,
Yes. Oh, right, the exhibits, I'm sorry, Jamie, let me see that. Okay, the exhibits to the handout, it's attached. The second exhibit Jamie wanted me to mention is about public body emails and other communications. And this is part of the council handbook, but she wanted to provide this for the members of the other commissions and committees that might be present. And are you all planning commission, or is there somebody here who's not planning commission? I'm sorry? Oh, good. Good. Okay, so now you are really smart. Okay. Anything else? All right, one more.
Can you please differentiate between the ombudsman and the attorney general and the difference in reporting to the two?
I have no idea who the ombudsman is.
And the ombudsman will keep everything confidential. If you go to the attorney general and they decide to follow it, your information is no longer private. They would be the ones to actually prosecute.
So who is it? Because I had this question. I'm not familiar with the ombudsman. Is that part of the AG's office, or?
Indirectly, it's an independent agency, and they keep everything confidential unless you request it. They tell you how to get out of a situation, what you need to do to correct a situation, and they will also tell you that sometimes they'll suggest you go to the Attorney General to prosecute it, and at which point everything becomes public. There is a particular person that council members deal with. They also deal with questions from the public on other issues. The individual who is assigned to deal with our council is actually a licensed attorney in the state, and has an interesting background. They're two different agencies. If they were going to prosecute it, it would be through the Attorney General's office, I believe. I had a local member of the community approached me and asked me if I knew what would happen, and I did not, and he spoke with the Attorney General's office and got a copy of the forms for reporting, and asked me if I'd ever seen them, and I had not, of course. Whether Attorney General takes a case or not is another issue, but that's the difference between the two, and you have the option of going to an ombudsman and maybe trying to correct a situation. Or if you really think you need to, you can go to the Attorney General's office and file a complaint.
Well, thank you. Do you have the contact information for the ombudsman?
Yeah, you can go online and just look it up, and you call
Okay.
their general number, and you don't have to tell the person who answers the phone much more than who you are. I know who the person is because she's been in that position a while.
Great.
I would not have remembered her name had
Catherine Marquardt.
Yeah. But there is a particular person, Catherine
Marquardt.
Yeah, Marquardt is the person who a council member would speak to, a member of the public. And they deal with other issues other than town councils. There's all sorts of public record issues and things like that. So they're pretty good, well-versed on a lot of topics. If you go on the website, it makes a description. The other thing is, if you're interested, you can look up the Attorney General decisions as a guideline. You can read through the one on internet our email was Yavapai College, got nailed on that 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And you can see the whole history of what happened, if you're interested. But
Yeah,
that's,
thank you.
those are really important issues. Usually you would call the ombudsman if you say, hey, I think I participated in something that may have been a violation of the open meeting law. How do I correct it? Oh my gosh, I realized later. And they'll tell you how to correct it. And you save everybody, the town, although you might make some people mad, you save yourself and the town a lot of hassle, because otherwise you become a participant, and should somebody decide to take it to the Attorney General, you're going to go down too. So
Right.
Anyway.
Well, thank you. That's good information.
And they are available to members of the public.
Right.
We have had people call the ombudsman about records requests that we were providing, because they just had general questions, or they thought something was taking too long, or they didn't like something that got redacted, or, and so then, the ombudsman calls us and explains the situation, and together they help us work it out.
Good.
So they're very helpful.
Good to know. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Guess we're done. Thank you all again.
Thank you.
Hooray!